Hi, Al.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me on Mindful Leaders Inherited Legacies in one of your favorite museums, the Gomidas Museum. Al, I like to use this platform as a way to connect with Armenians, not just on a professional basis, but on a personal basis. So engaging with people like yourself helps elevate our own experiences with our own selves. These conversations are not just about who we are, but why we're here. You are a serial entrepreneur. You've been in the startup business, primarily in the area of technology, for more than 20 years, and you're currently on your fifth company. Areas of agriculture, imagery, banking, software solutions, you name it, you've done it. And so what's interesting for me is not the technical aspect of it, but the fact that you always start a project or a company with a specific mission or a specific intention. That's technically to improve the lifestyle of people and primarily to actually help Armenia's economic development and to really place Armenia on the tech map. Why is that so important for you? Where do you get that drive?
I think it comes from just the educational background and also sort of observing my father, that he was always like encouraging people to start their own businesses, and he would, help his employees start businesses, and I think it started from there. And tech has always been sort of like central to me because I'm just naturally curious about what's coming, what's the cutting edge, and conceptually I feel pretty confident that I can come up with ideas and sort of put things together. And then from a standpoint of mission-based projects, it's really important for me to kind of heart and soul be in it. Like it's not just a money-making sort of endeavor or anything like this. It has to have otherwise I can't sustain it. I personally can't sustain it, and a lot of people I don't think can sustain it either. So that angle of creating something that doesn't exist, that energy that goes into that, the whole emotion of, recruiting people and coming up with the ideas and fighting and shaping and, getting something into your head to reality. It's exciting to me. I just love it. I used to write plays and stuff like that and poems when I was a kid. So that whole process of struggling and not giving up and knowing that there's somewhere you're getting to has been just sort of story of my life. I just really love that. So
I wanted to ask you more about Armenia, but I think I'll get to the Armenia point of it eventually, because you're based in California, but you're on a very regular basis here, and we'll get to that, the idea of the pledge that you've had.
Sure.
But before I get to that, when I speak to you, there are three specific values that pop up in my head, values that you lead with, your life and your company and everything else that you do with your family. One is honesty, the second is justice, and the third, and it's not exclusive obviously, but it's human kindness. The reason why I say that is because when it comes to honesty, and you mentioned about your dad, your parents are both from Iran, born in Peria in the region of Isfahan. So Serop is your father and Nargiz is your mother. And your father, at the age of 11, very young, the age of my daughter practically, leaves his family and moves to Tehran on his own. Probably with the intention to help his family's financial burden where they are in Peria. But I think his drive and his energy to actually do something for himself already started at a very young age. And he starts off in working in an Armenian baker and develops different types of jobs until early 20s. He opens his own restaurant and brings all of his family to Tehran. Now that takes a lot of, stubbornness, drive, you name it, but for a person who doesn't have more than a second grade education and who is well known in the region for being an honest business person who has a sense of integrity, that's pretty big. Is this where your sense of, honesty and the values that you strive for come from, or could you expand on
Yeah,
that?
I think so. I mean, I think it's that's why it's so important for me anyway, to the way that we raise our kids and how you are in the world. You choose. You actually decide, right? Because the world offers you infinite number of ways of being and surviving and choosing, right? And I think so. Those early experiences are, of course, they're etched in your brain and how you just react, how do you respond to the outer world. And I always saw my dad as just working very hard. He was just a very hard worker. And I think that that ethic of like you can work hard and you can get to places, and that
You don't have to cheat people to get there.
you don't have to cheat people to get there. If you're honest, as a matter of fact, you're in his restaurants anyway. One thing that I remember is like when people would come to his restaurant, they would like turn to their guests and say, "Welcome to my restaurant." So if your customers are saying, "Welcome to my restaurant," they've already said, "Oh, this is." So and then his generosity, and both of my parents, but my dad was just a very generous man.
Yeah, he was one of your inspirations.
Absolutely. He was always, he's always caring. Like, you got to take care of people. You got to take care of people. And so for me, that was just an example. And I think you sort of, as a human being, you have to choose, right? At some point in time, you have to choose. A lot of people think that, they can't do it. They're not awoke to their own personal power of how they treat people, how they even treat themselves, right? How do they use words, right? And my dad, even though he didn't have a formal education, he was a very successful businessman, and he was just education. He constantly talked about education.
A stickler for education.
Absolutely, and I think Armenians throughout history, we've kind of passed this gene of focusing on education. And I think that has been part of our survival, which is the fact that we can better ourselves through education has been a key thing. So, honesty is like, look, at the end of the day, the truth you only have to say once. A lie, you got to come up with another 1,000 lies to cover the first lie.
That's
so
absolutely true.
I think these are things that are important values that I got from my parents, and it was just, it was just.
So justice is another one that I mentioned earlier, and there were several episodes or memories that you had from your childhood that actually helped probably sustain or amplify this value for you in your adulthood. And that's probably because at a very young age, you heard your mother and your auntie speak, about the genocide, what had happened, the details. I mean, you weren't sitting there, you just kind of overheard the conversation. But what kicked in was that you started to ask yourselves, how could this happen to 1.5 million people? Why? And your sense of curiosity probably started from there. And that's where you started developing the interest to read Kayhan, the Iranian newspaper, the political section, and you encounter the famous Persian writer, Hamid Zarin, that's it, who actually wrote a 300-page book about the Armenian genocide. And here you are, Al, at the age of 7 or 8, reading these huge novels, from him, from Rafi, the novel of Rafi, Khente, So, and the third, I guess, memory or episode, there are many, but this one was what really touched me the most, is when you actually go on a pilgrimage to Saint Tadeusz Vank, the monastery, which is a UNESCO heritage site.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that pilgrimage and what you remember and what feelings you had?
Yeah, it's it's present for me as we speak. I mean, it's been 50 years, but when you go to Tadei Vank, as we say it in Bashkirtan, I actually sensed the love of those stone carvers. Like literally, I felt that church. It's an ancient church. It's by itself. There's really there's no village around it. There's nothing around it. And I vividly remember the first time we went there. My aunt's husband, my uncle. There was these Kurdish kids that would bring fresh milk and fresh cheese, and my uncle said that these are Armenians. Actually, they're kind of Kurdified, Islamicized Armenians.
So they're descendants of Armenians, but they've been Islamized, or they're Kurds now.
Yeah, and you know, it was interesting because when I looked at them, they looked like us. And I was a kid, and they wanted to play, and even though they were bringing milk, they wanted to play, and I was like, I didn't feel any different. And so that was very, for me, it was very moving to kind of tie me to my Armenianness. The sense of justice, look, I'm always concerned about the fate of not only Armenians but also humanity, right? Because we're all of us, all 7.5 billion of us, are stuck between this continuum of fear to love, right? And the closer we get to love, the more peaceful things are, the more productive and creative things are. And if we're kind of in appreciation of each other's cultures and in appreciation of each other's worth and value, and we're not kind of stuck into this fear of, being killed or being driven out or whatever, this fear is actually reproduces itself. But so does love, right? So does this part, which allows you to kind of start thinking about that you yourself have something to do here. You can create realities that you want to live in. That the words that comes out of your mouth actually create your reality. And I've seen it in my own life. There was a period in my life that I was kind of over on the fear side, right? And as I sort of went deeper, and I've been to 32 countries and I don't know, hundreds of cities. And one common thread has been that every human being wants to be loved. Every human being wants to feel secure. But that the minute you take that away from them, irrational decisions happen, right?
And irrational emotions flourish as well.
Absolutely, right? So if you kind of think about it that way, that's the way I think about it. Like, in the current day situation with Armenia, it's like how we speak to each other is just as much real as, this and the stone and the chair, right?
Absolutely.
And that reality for me, that whole sense of justice, like that you're not going to be okay. Like I've slept in 40 villages, Armenian villages, border villages. And I feel a huge kinship because I want to feel that reality of the other, right?
But it's not just the feeling of it, it's also you feel compelled to do
Absolutely.
Something about it as well.
When people tell me, how do I help? I go, just, where do I send money? I said, don't send money, just send yourself first. Because if you don't have a sense of realness, connection, wherever you are, by the way, it's like whether you're Armenian or non-Armenian, it doesn't matter. It's like to kind of feel like you're part of this bigger whole. Like some of my earliest, when I was a kid, when I was writing poems, I always imagined that like humans are just like part of this sort of bigger thing, that every one of us are a cell of it. And a later play, my first or second play, and there was a passage in there that like, what if all of us are just cells of this one body? And that whatever bad we do to ourselves, and whatever good we do to ourselves. And so that's the way I try to live my life. I wake up every morning and I meditate and I say, what am I going to be to the world today?
What is
How do
my
I
intention?
serve?
What is my intention?
It's absolutely, if you don't have an intention, that's the thing. Like I read a lot and I'm usually just giving books to people, like real books, not just digital, because it's important. Like, how do you change? How do you go from a state of, let's say, ignorance to a state of knowledge? You read and you talk to people, right? You surround yourself with people that are kind of ahead of you, or maybe have read more books. But ultimately, it brings you back to yourself, which is that you're whole and complete, that you're good enough.
But that's reciprocal. And basically, you don't do it by yourself, you do it with others, obviously.
Because you're part of, like, we are all connected.
Yeah.
We're all connected, no matter, like, of course, nations kind of separate, and we just, had this horrible war that happened last year. And I always say, like, it's not necessarily about coming out as the victor or as the victim or whatever, but this whole mentality of pointing to others as the cause of your misery puts you in a situation of victimhood. It puts you in a position of like you can't do something.
I agree with you, Al. I mean, I fully agree with you. However, being here during the 2020 war and witnessing still aggression and abuse from the Aliyev regime today, even on the borders, you can't help but say, when will I be able to actually overcome that victimhood? Because I mean, it's the sense of collective, continuous pressure of fear. When you live in fear, right? When you're always constantly in fear, you're thinking, my son will be next going to the army.
Absolutely.
So how do you actually overcome that? What measures would you? What advice would you give me of measures to take in my daily life?
I mean, it's hard for me to give advice to anybody, but at the end of the day, the way I look at it is, you don't really defeat evil. You just increase the good so that over time it becomes not fashionable to be the evil. Now, the situation with, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, like everybody has to take their own responsibility. Like, did you educate yourself? Did you educate your kids to be, because, I mean, everything is interrelated, right?
Right.
If you're not educating that's why education is so important.
Yeah.
Like if you really want to change reality, people have to, not just education from a standpoint of I want to go get a job, but like education, like your soul, your,
spiritually as well, not necessarily in terms of textbook or academic. Yeah.
So that's the way I look at it. I look at it as, I look at the current situation, and of course there's a lot of bad things, but if you look at the entire history of the entire Armenian history, it's still one of the best times. It's still one of the best times.
How so?
We're wealthier than we've ever been as a nation. Both.
We have a state.
We have a state. We have, we have freedoms, right? We can go out there and say whatever we want. I think that ultimately the most important thing that I think about is, what are you doing with the tools and plus opportunities that you get. What do you get?
Yeah.
What can you do with it? And
is that why you come here, Al? I mean, you talk about human kindness, but I also noticed that you're born in Iran. For 13 years you're there. At the age of 13, talk about parallel with your dad. At the age of 13, you moved to Oklahoma and then moved to California thereafter. Or only in your early 30s, or in 1996, you actually decide to come to Armenia. And at that time, you feel immediately a sense of connection. You didn't feel the same way being from Iran. You don't have that connection with Iran or maybe the US, the way that you have that connection or that feeling or the attachment with Armenia.
It was a different type of a connection. It was a very different type of a
But
connection.
that was the reason why you actually decided. It was after your second trip that you decided to make that 40-year pledge, now turned to 60.
60,
but,
right, yeah.
but see, you're talking about all this in a passionate way. I'm thinking, how does a person who is not from Armenia, has been reading so much about Eastern poets and literature, and has a sense of connection with this land, but not necessarily having been here, all of a sudden has this drive and makes a pledge for 40 years to come here every year to elevate the capacity and the capability of Armenia or Armenians. You teach them, you share your knowledge. Where does that come from? How did that happen?
It's a choosing.
Tell me.
It really is a choosing. It's like, the first time I came in '96, it was very tough, right? It was I went to Artsakh immediately, right? And look, it's difficult, not difficult. These people that made those sacrifices, those ultimate sacrifices, they're in my heart. So you can't quit. You can't say, well, it didn't work out, I'm gonna go whatever. So for me, it was just choosing. Because everybody chooses. You
said you had 3 reactions on deciding on what. Can you tell me what those 3 reactions?
And I have it. I write in my journal almost. Back then I wrote almost every day. Now I write about every week. And I actually went back and I read what I wrote, and I said, well, I have three choices.
For Armenia.
For
anything.
How do you react?
Yeah.
Because the thing is, when you live in Iran, you live with this sort of love of Armenia and this sort of fantasy of Armenia. But when you come and face with reality of Armenia, then you have to make a choosing.
So what are those three choices?
You know, I mean, I literally wrote, I said, well, choice number one, I said, this is a terrible situation here, and the economy was horrible. The first war, the first Artsakh war had just finished like a couple of years ago. There was no trees in Yerevan, like you go around, all the trees were cut off. And I was like, well, I can just turn back and say, you know what?
There's nothing I can do.
There's nothing I can do, whatever. I hope it works out well, and just kind of disengage. Because it was just too hard. Emotionally, it was too hard to engage. And I was 31 years old at that time, so I wasn't a kid, right? I wasn't like young and whatever, idealistic. You know, the second one was like, you know, I'm gonna have to engage. Like, I'm gonna build it. Like, it's my responsibility. Nobody's gonna do it. I mean, and if I want any of my friends to come and join me, anybody else to join me, I'm gonna just shut up and just do. Like, you know, like the thing that in Armenia, you know, the most famous sentence in Armenia is
Right.
It's not what it's like, it's not like what was my responsibility. It's like, I'm gonna come up with ideas, but you know, when it comes to actual work, you know, well, I'm busy, or I've got obligations. By the way, you know, I had young children and I wasn't necessarily financially, you know, rich to do it, but this mission of giving.
But you had a strong conviction to do
Absolutely. So, and that's the thing, that's the truth. So the third thing is where you're kind of in this state of confusion, you know, like maybe I'll help, that you're not making a decision.
Where you're complaining all the time.
Actually, I think it's worse to be in the middle versus saying, you know, I'm just going to disengage and just go whatever, do business and whatever, just go kind of work my.
Why is it more dangerous?
Because in that middle, you're in this constant state of not choosing and not being powerful as a human being.
For yourself.
For yourself. Look, ultimately, if you yourself can't achieve greatness, be awakened to your greatness. Everybody's great. All children are great. And then over time, what happens is like they become degrades, right?
Right.
Like people just keep telling them.
Because they believe in themselves at a young age. They take risks, whereas if you grow older, you're told not to do something, so you actually close yourself off to the potential that you have or you're born with.
Exactly, and I want to again give credit to my dad, where, you know, when I came to America, I came from Iran, and then they took the hostages, and it was really difficult. I lived in Oklahoma, which is kind of like at that time was there wasn't that many immigrants in Oklahoma. So I called my dad and I said, well, there's all this stuff going on and it's really hard, and what do you think I should do? And he goes, what do you think you should do?
He never told you.
At 14, 15, he was telling me, make your decision. And I think that's what we want. What do we do in most Armenian families? Oh my God, you know, don't do this, keep them safe, keep them, right?
Right.
And I think what that does, gives this artificial feeling to the kid that he is not capable, that mom and dad have to take care of me forever. And I think that's so back to like the decision. For me, it was, I'm going to engage.
But you're not making a pledge to come here just to actually do
The pledge happened in '99.
No, but I mean, you're not just saying, I'm going to make a pledge to come here every year, go to, you know, Karni Kegart, and then whatever. You actually make a pledge to actually do something about it, and in what capacity in the capacity that you actually have, that you can do something about it. Whether it's education, whether it's sharing your knowledge, whether it's developing a startup, whether
it's taking 100 people to a village in Armenia.
Which you did, non-Armenian people.
Yeah. I've read a lot of non-Armenian. Because the thing is, the culture is very rich. See, this is the thing, like when the isolationism and myopia, cultural myopia, actually doesn't do us any service. Like, I literally love Armenia. Like, I love every village. You have to understand it. This is also, some people say, well, you know, Armenia, you keep going, and is it ever going to change? I go, look, I'm not going to Armenia to necessarily change Armenia. I'm going to save myself. Because here in Armenia, Armenians have to realize it's a real thing. And not because of, I'm not talking about nationalism. There's a certain energy here. I've brought Japanese people here, I've brought Americans here, and everybody, like at the end says, there's a different type of energy here. The warmth of the people, even though initially they look very tough and rough and whatever, but oh my God, you know, like you go past that 5 minutes of roughness and toughness, they are
genuine.
Wonderful.
But they're genuine.
They're genuine, wonderful people. So like yes, the passion and stuff like that is great, But I always go back and I say, look, imagine that the person that you're throwing this mud at is your son, is your daughter, is your cousin, is your dad, right? And I think, look, it's normal human behavior. It's nothing specific to Armenians, right? Like politics or whatever,
yeah.
It's everywhere. But the thing is that if more and more people kind of just genuinely appreciate the other, just take a moment, like take 5 minutes a day and say, you know what, today I'm going to be nice to the GG driver or the cab driver or the restaurant person. It changes reality.
Well, that's why when I say another value that you have is human kindness, right? That's yours and Sabine's modus operandi. I mean, it's basically
There's
the way you live.
There's nothing else.
Yeah. Why? Why do you say that?
There's nothing else. We share the world. What are you going to do? You're going to kind of lock yourself up in that's boring. That leads to suicide and depression.
Right, but
so you're going to live with people.
Yeah.
It's, shake my hand. Did you notice you didn't go like, okay, I'm going to go 50%, you come 50%, I come 50%. You just shake, you take 100% responsibility for that relationship. And my philosophy, my wife's philosophy is that, which is every day you have an opportunity to be happy.
To do good.
And not only to do good to others, but also to yourself. What environment do you want to live in?
But that has to come from a place of love.
Absolutely. That's that continuum of fear and love, right?
It has to come from, so if you choose that source of power, that's your source of love, it's technically speaking, you're able to do that. But if you're always surrounded by fear, anger, rage, right? It's difficult to actually identify or find that source.
Even in the midst of that, you still have a choosing. You still have a choice. In the midst of that, like, when the war was raging and people would call and then after the war ended, and I have a lot of friends. I'm rich in friends. I love my friends. I have lots and lots of friends all over the place, and I make friends everywhere, right? And people would call and like definitely moved, saddened, angry, right?
From what occurred.
What had occurred, and of course some of the decisions that are being made. And I go, look, guys, we're not in government. You're not in government. I'm not in government.
Correct.
And certain decisions are being made. So why don't you go run? Why don't you go to Armenia? Why don't you go live in Armenia for 10 years? Yeah. And then you'll kind of understand the dynamic of it, and then you'll choose. You've got a lot of ideas, right? So when people would come to complain to me, I would say, you know what? I'll listen to your complaints. I'll even engage in some of the complaints, but an hour later. But right now, in this next hour, let's work on some stuff. Like, what are you going to do? How are we going to help the situation? Let's focus in the solutions area, because we know what the problems are. Like, everybody knows what the problems are. Every problem is sourced from one problem. There's that gigantic problem called ignorance. Everything else is a version of that ignorance.
But we need that ignorance is actually salvageable if you are able to identify.
Education, right?
Apart from education, even as adults, you need to have those kinds of platforms to be able to have conversations, to have a dialogue. You may say, well, having a dialogue with no end or means to an end, for me is wasted time. But at the same time, having that dialogue perhaps will give me, hearing your ideas, some thought on things that I never.
If it's intentional, right? I think because what I kind of see, unfortunately, right, and this is part of humanity. It's not anything unique with Armenians, right? The human brain, the way that it's evolved, it's an optimizing organism, right? Which is least effort. It always takes you to least effort. Well, it's least effort for me to criticize you versus to say, you know what, let me understand you.
Right, absolutely.
Let me understand you, and then you understand. Let's work on something, right?
Correct.
So if you look at us, right, there's a lot we can do. Globally we can do a lot. If we can just park our anger and our, frustration and channel it. I always say, park your fears and drive your inspiration. Right? If you constantly are driving your anger, there's no good that comes out of that. That's why I say, first hour, we work on stuff. After, you know what? No one has decided after the hour to go to the complaining. That's what I mean from a personal power perspective, that your words and how you see your own personal power to change the narrative, to change
activate that kind of a narrative, yeah.
Right? Because look, I see it, right? I mean, that's why I come here a lot, and I see how, 10 years ago, the tech industry wasn't what it is today. It takes active conversation. It takes, and there's always failures. So I changed long time, like 20 years ago, I changed the definition of failure to lessons. There's no failure in life. Like this war, I hope it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call, right? It's because, look, if you're secure in yourself, in your state, in your education system, if you're secure in your human relationships, if there's justice, right, then you can actually negotiate from a position of strength, yes, but also from a position of logic, right? It's weird, right? It's weird that we have lands that nobody lives there. And then also, if you can't be nice to the people you're occupying this land.
Inside the land.
Right?
We're not talking about the enemies, we're talking about internal.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's all one organism.
Right.
How do you, everybody's driven around Armenia, just throwing trash everywhere. Where does throwing trash everywhere come from? Ignorance. Where does treating your fellow human being negatively or wrong way comes from? Ignorance. Where does violence comes from? Ignorance. Where does lack of ability to actually make enough money to pay your whatever expenses come from? Ignorance. So the antidote to all of that is education. So education, unfortunately, it doesn't scale where you just push a button and it happens. It takes years.
Yeah, it has to be institutionalized as well. Probably.
So I think that also goes back to, I have to give credit to my dad, which is always about education.
Yeah.
Always, my mom used to say, never laugh at anybody because you could be there. What was there? They were teaching me empathy.
Well,
right?
That's when I talk about the values that you have, obviously human kindness and the love, you have to, and if you're an activator, as you are, you have to also be able to read the room and understand who you're actually with and be able to speak that language with love, obviously.
But it's important, right? You have to understand that you're in service to the other human being.
Yeah, but I don't think it's something that you actually are aware of. I think that's something that you have to either, again, maybe it's part of education, maybe it's part of the environment. It really is, undergoing that kind of a spiritual awakening even.
Yeah.
It's not something that everybody would be able to easily undergo, especially when
they can. Everybody can do it. It's a question of kind of, again, parking your fear and driving your inspiration or your love. And I think for me, that's what I got to work on too. And that's why it was easy for me to make a 40-year commitment.
Yeah.
Because it was like, I love this place.
Well,
I want all my friends to move here. I want to move here.
But you're bringing a lot of people. You're bringing businesses here. You're helping with the investment. You've changed your 40-year pledge to 60-year pledge.
Yeah, until I'm 95.
Till you're 95, God willing. Anyway,
he wills.
Al, I just want to tell you that it's always such a pleasure to sit with you because it's great to hear people that have this kind of an awakening, the sense of love and appreciation and the huge dedication you have for Armenia and Artsakh has been unprecedented. I'm really very pleased that you have increased your pledge and that you're coming more often and that you're actually doing something about it. And I wish you nothing but success. Thank you for joining me on this program.
Thank you so much for the opportunity and thanks for you doing what you're doing, which is increasing the good. So appreciate it.
I appreciate that too, Al. Thank you.
Okay.